you mentioned Apple earlier. Now, that's a real interesting case of leadership. And here's a guy that really didn't care if he connected or not with his team. So he didn't really build it in a lot of ways in a traditional sense. But he obviously built a phenomenal team and huge value. Talk a little bit about the characteristics of Steve Jobs and the characteristics of his key top leaders to make that thing work. Because it was a special recipe that maybe it was so unique it can't be repeated. I don't know. What do you think?
He was the Michael Jordan of computers, Okay, we're talking about the characteristics of Steve Jobs and the characteristics of his leaders, the dynamic and how that worked, when in fact, anybody that knows somebody that worked for Steve Jobs knows in their most honest moment, they're not going to be effusive about what a sweetheart he was always to work with. I had to do a course, I'll tell a story to answer the question. Shocker. I was brought in to speak to a local community who was they were putting leaders through a 10-week leadership course where they learn about the community, they learn about leadership, they learn about the business. You do some of that here in West Michigan. And they wanted me to speak about leadership. So I need to know where the audience's perspective is before I start, right? So I said, what is the single number one determination of a leader? And I got character and quality and good heart and a listener, and I've got all these nice words that we've heard in all these leadership books since since the alpha leader was pushed out and the younger leaders came in the early 80s. And one guy raised his hand. He was the head of the hospital at the time, and he says, I just got back from a course on leadership. I'm thinking, you're in a damn course on leadership, but go ahead. And he says, leadership are like the 5 points of the star. And I'm going, oh God. Now the star has 5 points. And each point's going to stand for a word. And the words were all the same words: integrity and intelligence and courage and listening and these things. And I said, I'm asking for the one thing that determines a leader. And I wrote on the flip chart, leadership is determined by the willingness of others to follow. If there's nobody behind you, do the math, you ain't leading. It's the willingness of others to follow. To follow what? Initially, your notion, your idea of identity, of who you can be, who we can create, who we can be. Steve Jobs was a genius at that. That's the first part of the answer. There's a line in one of the movies that they did on Steve Jobs. I didn't see the movie, but there's a line in the movie where his number two guy gets very off at him. I mean, really upset. I mean, letting him have it, which you didn't do too often with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs knew he needed this guy because this guy codes and does all kinds of things. Steve didn't write code. So he says, you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't do this, you're not capable of that, you don't even do this. What is it you do? And Steve Jobs says, I play the orchestra. He had that understanding that he could iconically represent what? He could iconically represent the smart rebel. And he dressed the part. And he never changed that outfit. He's the smart rebel. He's the cool rebel. We're taking out an industry. We're not just making a cool little gadget. We're defying the man by taking out the industry. And he represented that. And they believed they could do it because he told them they could. And he had an idea of how. That's a great leader. Likable guy? I'll let everybody decide. I can't say anything bad about the man. I had no experience with him personally. I just tell you, I know people that worked for him, and they wouldn't put likable guy above great leader. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?